Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore, your host. Today on the show, we have Michael from End of the Road podcast. He's an attorney, and we get into some patent stuff. There's been a lot of conversation around patents in the psychedelic world, and figured it was an important topic to discuss. He recently had us on his show, and it was really fun, and we got to talk a little bit about some of this stuff, but we got into a lot more depth on patents in this show. So hope you enjoy it. There might be some challenging material in there, and let me know what you think. I would love to hear from you about it. You can hit us up at Psychedelics Today, email at gmail.com, or use the contact form at psychedelicstoday.com. If you want to support the show, there's a few different ways. You could just give us a review on iTunes or Facebook. Tell a friend about your favorite episode. Maybe tweet or put on Facebook or something, one of your favorite episodes. You can also join our Facebook group, Psychedelics Today group. You just search for that. You can connect with a lot of the listeners, and that would maybe help you have a deeper sense of community in the psychedelic space and make some connections and friends. Also get some interesting questions answered on there. So we still have a very serious drug crisis in the country. There's a new stat I've been seeing about how more people died in 2017 from drug-related overdoses than people who died from the peak of the HIV epidemic, from gun violence, and from car accidents. So realistically, we are in a really bad spot with drugs. Prohibition is really the cause. We could reduce harms quite a bit if we ended prohibition, but maybe that's a long shot. You'll see people who just do random drugs they find on the ground. You'll see people who don't do drug testing. And a lot of that comes down to education. So if you want to reduce the risk of you having a negative drug event, we think a good solution is the Navigating Psychedelics course. Navigating Psychedelics is a course that Kyle and I put together, and it covers a lot of topics around the psychedelic space that could keep you safe. So check it out. Navigating Psychedelics on Google will bring you there. It's psychedelicstoday.teachable.com gets you there. You can also get there from our main website. It features hours and hours and hours of lecture from us on all sorts of important topics, from theory and practice around psychedelics, how to test drugs, how to plan your trip, create the space, all that kind of stuff. And just practical historical material that gives you a framework that you can reflect on while you're in the experience. And we also included a whole bunch of masterclasses from people who are experts in various sub areas of psychedelia. So definitely check that out if you want to get educated. There's even a free version on there if you want to check it out first. And it comes with a 30-day trial. So if you're money back guarantee. So if you hate it or it's not what you wanted, just send us a message and do a refund. We'll be happy to make that happen for you. Hasn't happened yet, but doesn't mean it won't happen to you. So anyway, enjoy the show with Mike, and let us know what you think. Peace. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today on the show, we have Mike, who is a podcaster over at End of the Road. He's also a longtime trial attorney and has been doing patent work for the last 2 years, 3 years or so. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Great. So we had some interesting conversations about patents and psychedelics. Unfortunately, we had to re-record, but hopefully that means this is a better show for everybody. So let's maybe give people a little background in you and maybe how you got into psychedelics. Does that sound okay?
Well, I'd rather just focus on the patent aspect of it. That's okay with you, Joe.
Absolutely.
I should say that, since I am an attorney, I probably should read a disclaimer, and just so your listeners can be aware that, this interview is for informational purposes only. It's not for the purposes of providing legal advice. You should contact your own attorney to obtain advice with respect to any particular issue of or problem in use of or access to this podcast, the website, or any of the email links contained within the site do not create an attorney-client relationship between me and the firm I work with and your users or listeners. And the opinions expressed by me are my own only, and they are not those of my firm. And overall, any attorney will tell you, do not break the law. I just want to give you some backgrounds on kind of the issues that are out there in intellectual property dealing in this space, which is kind of interesting. And as you pointed out, the new thing with psilocybin is very interesting and has a lot of implications, I think.
Absolutely. So the first thing you raised when we connected was this patent somebody put on ayahuasca. You want to dig into that?
Sure. It's a fascinating story, one that I wasn't aware of, but there was a guy back in 1986, and I'm pulling this from a Boston College Law Review article. But anyway, his name was Loren Miller. He was an alleged American scientist and entrepreneur in California, and he actually obtained a U.S. patent on a strain of the ayahuasca vine. And this really upset, as you might suspect, a lot of the indigenous people in that area, and they formed a group. And I guess it took him about 10 years to realize that this guy had patented ayahuasca. But anyway, they got 400 indigenous tribes together, and there's a proceeding you can go through in the patent office to challenge the validity of the patent, and they did that. And I guess that, I'm reading this in this article. It says that the controversy over this patent generated considerable hostility between the United States and Ecuador, and eventually led to Ecuador's legislature's decision to not sign a bilateral intellectual property agreement with the United States. So good for them.
That's outstanding. It's interesting that psychedelics would have that much influence on international relations.
Well, I mean, this is very important in our culture. Is you're well aware, and this is like a religious type thing for them. And to some bozo from California to think that he discovered ayahuasca in 1980s kind of goes against several thousand years of South American culture, I'm sure. But what's interesting is there's really no way that this should have ever been patented. Using the criteria that you look at for patents. I mean. We went in a little bit this last time, but a patent, if you're going to have a patent, it either has to be on, the statutes say it either has to be a process, machine, or a manufacture or composition of matter. So ayahuasca obviously is not a process. Well, I mean, you can do processes probably with ayahuasca, but it's not a machine. So that, what they hung their head at was this third one, composition of matter. But really, a composition of matter shouldn't be something that is naturally growing. You've got to alter it somehow to make it your own. To make it your own invention. There's a Supreme Court opinion from the United States back in the 80s. It says patent protection does not depend on whether the substance is living or non-living. It's whether you alter it so that it is deemed a non-naturally occurring substance. So obviously, the tribes people from Ecuador and other places in South America had a really good argument that if you just take the plant and don't alter it, you shouldn't be getting a patent on a naturally occurring substance. So that was their big argument. And we talked a little bit before. I mean, there are all kinds of different patents that have been applied for other plants. I think there are 500 active patents on cannabis-related substances. You mentioned the psilocybin patents that are kind of in the news lately. But basically, all those have to be, that they have to somehow modify a natural substance to make it patentable. And by just taking a plant from South America and getting a patent on it should not be occurring. You have to, reproduce it in such a way that makes it a non-naturally occurring plant.
Right. So two things. I recall when I was really involved in the food movement and organics and permaculture, there was a lot of discussion around organizations owning the genome. Like, are you familiar with that? So like they could own the green bean genome versus like if they sequenced it or something. Does that sound right?
Yeah. Well, see, and then and again, I'm not familiar with that particular, but if it's something that's not occurring naturally and you're modifying it, then that's an invention. That's something that you can seek patent protection from.
Right. So yeah, it's almost like there's this, like either if you did GMO work to it, or what do they call that? Transgenic modification or something. So like they actually modify the genome, that would be a non-naturally occurring thing. Or maybe if you did like 20 iterations of training the plant, it would become, very different from the naturally occurring species. So you could probably patent that variety because that would not happen naturally.
Right. Would be a plant patent. Yes. And there's a specific statute on that.
So yeah, let's jump over to psilocybin. So Compass Pathways is this organization with a lot of controversy. They applied for a patent, not for psilocybin. So they haven't patented psilocybin. They patented a production method of psilocybin called good manufacturing practice. That's kind of the global standard for manufacturing pharmaceuticals in a standardized way that's safe for people to consume. What your dosage is each time, stuff like that. So yeah, we had chatted about that last time. We kind of decided we'd chat about it a little bit this time. I'm curious, like what you've read, and what you found interesting in your review of that situation, Compass Pathways.
Sure. What I found is that Compass Pathways did apply for a British patent. And the patent is titled Preparation for Psilocybin, Different Polymorphic Forms, Intermediaries, and Formulations in Their Use. And this patent, sometimes you can publish, sometimes patent applications are published. This one I couldn't get my hands on I don't know how in Britain, whether they publish all the patents, but in the United States, you can apply for a patent not to be published as well. So anyway, all I know is the title of it. And then I'm assuming that what they have done, if you look at the, some of the news releases, is that they have, as you have said, let me get the article out that I was reading about it. As you have said, the FDA requires that you meet certain standards when you test a product for purity. So what they're saying, I think, is that we had to invest all this money to make this pure form of psilocybin, and therefore I think that is probably what they're trying to patent.
Absolutely.
And then they were saying, I'm assuming somewhere in this patent is this is non-naturally occurring. It's that's why we deserve protection. Plus the fact that that we are going to be running phase 3 FDA trials on it. That's all expensive, and that's probably their justification for a lot of the costs and agreements that have come up around it. But I did also read some of the scientists were upset and have signed kind of it's called a statement on open scientists and open praxis with psilocybin, MDA, and similar substances, that they've got like a 4-point manifesto on it, and they have some big names, I think, that signed off on it. Even people like Ram Dass, wanting to make this, I guess trying to make it non-capitalistic, more, kind of, make it toward so that it's nobody has a monopoly on it, but it can be shared with everybody. So I'm aware of that group of scientists that have delivered that statement as well.
Right. So there's a few funny things that have happened there. So I guess the one of the main concerns is that because these guys have exclusive rights to it, they might really do some unfair pricing moves at Compass.
Right.
So like a la Martin Shkreli did with what was it? I forget the name of the drug he marked up, but it was a pretty substantial life-saving drug, and it went from really cheap to like 3,000 times the price. So that's a big deal, and that would be a real bummer if that happened. Secondarily, I think this organization doesn't have the same origins as the other groups. So a lot of these other groups have just been decades of collaboration and open sharing about what is best practice, how do we do this well and minimize harms. And I think that's not necessarily the origins of the team that makes up Compass. Which is good. It's going to bring new psychiatrists into the fold, except that they're not sharing as much as other folks might share, which is a problem, I think, at times. But that's something that we all have to work out. And there's going to be some really interesting journalism coming out soon on Compass. It's definitely a big deal. And there might have been some highly unethical stuff that happened there, not just applying for a patent, but beyond that. And hopefully we hear more about that soon. People are playing their cards close to their chest before this stuff comes out. So we're probably going to do some journalism on that as well. Was there anything else you found in review of that the Compass material that was interesting?
No, I guess that we have seen there have been some psilocybin patent applications by Paul Stamets as well that we talked about, and I didn't know if he was probably not connected with that particular application, but it's really kind of interesting. There's a way that, in a way, we talked about that ayahuasca application, that and the patent that came back in the 80s and 90s. If you actually do get out there in the scientific literature about patents and ayahuasca and other chemicals, it makes it more difficult to get patents in the future because, again, to get a new patent, there has to be a new invention. And if something has already been described in a pre-existing patent, like ayahuasca or, different formulations of psilocybin, it makes it all more less likely in the future that there would be broad-based patents because to make a patent, it has to be something new. It has to be novel. It has to be a new invention. It also has to be a non-obvious extension of a prior patent. So, and again, I mean, people can disagree with that, but the fact that somebody actually put a patent in the 80s on ayahuasca will make it more difficult that nobody now could get a similar patent because the patent office should go back and say, well, hey, this has already been done. This is all prior art and it's not a new invention. So, that could be the same thing if, there are more patents on psilocybin or other things, that it makes it more difficult to get a patent protection because it's already out there. It already is prior art. Nobody's coming up with any new unless it's a very precise formulation. And that's the part that probably what Compass is doing. They're trying to, it's a new method of manufacture to do that, even because we're talking about natural occurring plants.
Right. And here's a clarification too on the Compass thing. This is only one way of making GMP psilocybin. I'm not a chemist. I don't even play one on the internet, but people theoretically are quite creative and could come up with other methods of generating GMP psilocybin. So human imagination is powerful and vast. So, if people, I know people who are just like totally heartbroken by this, but I'm like, come on guys, like you can grow mushrooms. If you're a good chemist, you might be able to come up with a secondary process, especially if you have some funding. So, what's really the big problem here? They might pull a move like MAPS has, where they have kind of exclusive access to administer these methods. But, I still think there's room for other players here. And it's not the end of the world, like a lot of people are making it out to be. Do you mind going into what the Paul Stamets patents are about?
Yes. The one is, the title is Using Psilocybin and Niacin for Neuroregeneration. It focuses on neuroregenerative composition based upon constituents isolated from or contained within mushroom fruit bodies or mycelia, or the corresponding synthetic molecules combined with niacin. And let me see, we were looking at that one last time.
Yeah.
And let me find it again. Yeah, if you wanted to look this up, I think he has a number of patents. One of them is if you Google it, if you go to the Google patent site or the USPTO site, it's US 15494503. Its filing date was originally April 23rd, 2017, and there's another one in 2018. And it's kind of interesting that he actually has all kinds of claims on, proving just about that mushrooms improve basically every aspect of human functioning you can think of. It improves memory and cognition. The method or the composition to improve motor skills and coordination, to improve and solve complex computer coding challenges, to improve hearing, to improve vision, to improve sensory function, to improve learning, to promote neurogenesis. And it's not only just psilocybin, but he's mixed up claim number 11. He has a number of organic plants that he's mixing the psilocybin with, everything from ayahuasca to cannabis to oregano, green tea, turmeric, rosemary, ginkgo biloba. So I mean, it's just like, and again, I don't think this has not been approved, but initially, it's an extremely broad patent trying to cover all sorts of therapeutic applications for psilocybin and mixing in with other plants. So that, I guess the advantage again, and again, I don't know what his motives are, but it kind of, now that somebody has applied for this type of patent, the patent office, then if somebody else comes and say, I want to mix psilocybin with, ayahuasca to make this, because somebody's already tried it before, it's not patentable because it's not novel. So I don't know if that was his motive or he's trying to capitalize on this or not, but that could be one of the indirect effects of it.
I think he definitely would capitalize on it. What he's done in the past has been really sharing. He's put out almost every bit of his data in a huge set of books. So, like how to grow the best formulations for different mushrooms, all that kind of stuff. It's all out there. He is really good at patenting though. So like, I think he has one where, I think this is his most famous one. It's kind of a pesticide replacement, but it's a fungi that infects carpenter ants that can destroy people's homes. And it infects these ants and it brings them back to their homes and spreads to the rest of the colony. So the colony just goes away and stops eating your house. So you can kind of get away with a non-toxic living thing as opposed to using tons of pesticides. And the pesticides are less effective than this. So really interesting thing there. He's also done some really interesting stuff around smallpox with various mushrooms like agarikon, working with the Defense Department. So he's got a lot of interesting patents under his belt and applications, obviously. I'm glad he applied for this patent because I think what it means, the microdosing patent specifically, is that other companies couldn't block folks from using it in this way or developing their own. I would love to be able to buy psilocybin from Paul Stamets. That would be nice, but it's probably a while out. So maybe what he could do is make the product without the psilocybin, and people could buy that from him with some other supplements in it, and they add their own. Maybe.
One of the other things that I saw, there's a gentleman who's an inventor named Andrew Chadeayne, and he's got a CamTech application. He's got his own psilocybin patent update blog, but it looks like he's an inventor and has a number of patents that he's applied for within the psilocybin space as well.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yes. so there seems to be, like you were saying, there's a lot of interest in it, and hopefully it's not just going to be one monopolizing entity that's going to run away with all this.
I suppose, like, as an attorney, do you have any like opinions on monopoly law? Like, at what point does somebody hit a monopoly? It's such a vague thing, right? Like, full vertical integration across a number of industries, like, could count as one, but I don't know. Like,
yeah, and maybe that wasn't the best. Maybe my choice of wording of monopoly wasn't necessarily good, but it's you just take any popular drug, that is used in the market, that's what I'm sure. If you were a drug company wanting to capitalize in this space, you would try to, have all your bases covered so that you can capitalize on your invention, and then preclude other competitors from getting a toehold either into the research or the distribution angle of it.
Yeah, I think that's something we have to consider too. Like, these, we're not living in Soviet Russia. We're not living in some sci-fi future that everything's shared all the time. Like, we're surrounded by businesses, and for better or worse. Like, I think it's pretty much okay that most businesses exist, but a lot of people don't. So, like, these entities are going to do what they have to do to make money, even if it doesn't feel fair or seem fair. So, like, folks out there, just think about that. Like, if what you want is a Marxist future, perhaps work towards that. I'm probably not going to do that, but I know folks that are. It's a little confusing to me, but I know there's like post-property type theoreticians out there, like Daniel Pinchbeck, who have all sorts of frameworks that could work for this. But yeah, were you going to say something there?
No, it's just, and again, I would not want to go to Cuba for healthcare, but I have heard that Cuba, the government sponsors research and is the only place to offer treatment of some tropical related diseases that don't have a big economic incentive to treat in the United States, but their government funds them because, for the public good. So, there might be a way that we could use that sort of modified model to, your Marxist friends could use that sort of modified model to get some of these things on the marketplace, and without really the capitalist model that is sort of driving a lot of the other the items that have patent protection in it. So, but that's way above my pay grade. But that's something.
Right. Cuba's an interesting case, and I agree. I probably wouldn't go there for much, but if I got a fancy tropical disease, maybe. But they had a really interesting thing that happened there forever ago when Russia kind of fell apart and was not able to really feed Cuba oil and that kind of stuff anymore. Cuba was kind of on its own. Cuba did have to go through this thing called peak oil, where oil prices just went through the roof and people had to figure it out. Being a communist country, they had particular advantages that other countries wouldn't have. But two things happened. Research had to go towards what could the government do to make non-petroleum based fertilizer and organic ag so that they could use less oil overall to feed their population. And secondarily, they trained a lot of doctors and mailed them over to Venezuela. So it was kind of like a doctors for oil program for a while. So that's where they got their oil from. And they did this kind of interesting nationalized science program where I think the country owned the patents. So it wasn't such a cost prohibitive thing. I would love to see the government fund more science and we have more open science federally available, and then people do what they want with it. It's an interesting thing to figure out, like, how do we as a culture want to deal with patent and innovations and inventions. I think there's some room there. In the technology field, you'll see people copywriting their inventions or patent. Well, I guess it wouldn't be a patent unless it was through the federal government, but using open source methods like the Creative Commons or the GNU public license to allow for anybody to use their invention, given certain constraints. Maybe it's attribution, maybe it's only for non-commercial purposes, and maybe it is for commercial purposes. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Protecting your invention through open source means is a pretty interesting thing to me. Are you very familiar? Or go ahead, sorry.
No, it just seems like, the history of the patent, and maybe this is a gross oversimplification, but you had the inventor, who's got some new invention, and it was really to protect the invention, not a way to use the patent laws to more effectively dominate the market. Maybe,
right.
Maybe it's, and not as a way that I'm going to make this invention so that I can be, make it more, it's all about sort of marketing the invention to get the patent as opposed to actually promoting the invention itself. But maybe I'm just naive about how that, how it's all worked over the years. But it just seemed like it kind of goes against the basic idea of patents, of just preserving the invention as opposed to, safeguarding a marketplace.
Yeah, you're right. It's interesting. I think in one way, you could look at it like that. Because with Compass, it's not just a patent that they're dealing with. It's a whole system of things they're dealing with to possibly do that and dominate a certain segment. But I think largely, small people, even you and I could apply for a patent, and it should theoretically hold up against IBM or Monsanto or something. Theoretically, they've got a lot more money to spend than I do, but it is to protect the small guy and also the big guy out there. And it's not just patents that could be a problem, right? It's all sorts of things, from FDA licensure to various exclusive things. So I'm trying to think. Last time we chatted, we found so many interesting patents online that I was pretty excited about, including this German guy who is just cranking out psychedelic patents. It seemed like.
Right. Yeah. There was we talked about we talked about intranasal administration of ketamine to treat depression.
Right.
That came from a group at Yale, I believe, funded by, looks like, the National Institute of Health. And it talked about it's described as a method for treating a human patient for treatment-resisting depression, comprising intranasally administering a composition comprising ketamine to said patient at dosage just sufficient to reduce or eliminate symptoms of treatment-reducing depression. And so that is probably it. I don't know if that's the one that they're using for the FDA trials or not, but certainly would be of use. We talked about the one that's coming from the University of California scientists over there that were using they're not calling it psychedelics, but it's compounds for increasing neuroplasticity. And it actually is, they're describing it as a non-hallucinogenic analog of psychedelic compounds, but it goes into detail about the organic chemistry involved and, how it's going to affect neuroplasticity and things like that. So there is a lot of use on that.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I think last time we also found novel devices that people were developing in order to administer in different ways, like the intranasal thing, and also advanced inhaler technology, similar to how people would inhale something like Buterol for asthma. They could develop different kinds of cartridges and chemical formulations for administering THC, ketamine, anything else like that could go for a intranasal or inhalant administration method. So really interesting. I think we even saw a German company that was making, or is a European company making medical marijuana cartridges. So pretty much like what was it? It was like a whole plant extract, so like full spectrum whole plant extract that could be applied in a inhaler type configuration. So different from a vaporizer technology you might see out there, but still very effective.
I think it's this one. It was the company was SYQE.
Yes.
So you said it was an Israeli company, maybe?
That's right. That sounds appropriate.
And it was that was where they were pulmonarily delivering a pharmacologically active agent and a second pharmacologically active agent, at least one being one plant material and another being another plant material, and using a meter dose inhaler device to vaporize the plants and mix them together. So that of course would be a machine subject to patent, a method of delivery that would be subject to patent protection. This one, if anybody's interested, is it's a patent cooperation treaty application, PCT-IL 2015-050676 originally. From
right. It's a fascinating website. I think people out there should check this out. SYQE medical.com. The pharmacokinetic data. Well, two things that are really fascinating here that are of interest. So like, number one, smoking can be a little rough. Smoking is a really tricky route of administration for some drugs like cannabis. But, they're saying the dosing precision of smoking cannabis is only at like 38.7%. But with their device, dosing precision is more like 74.7%. So like coming close to doubling the precision of the dose, which is a big deal when you're dealing in a medical scenario. And the other thing here is the onset it peaks at about 2 minutes of inhalation. So it's in your body doing stuff at 2 minutes pretty well. And it's like a nice linear curve on their chart. So yeah, check that out. And this is a big deal. So this is happening in Tel Aviv, Israel. There's a lot of data happening right now. Data coming out of various cannabis things about how Israel is producing, I think, the lowest price per gram of cannabis anywhere in the world, because they're in a situation where universities can do it research they choose they want to do. Right now, I think it's still the case, but there's only one grower available. It's a federal grow facility, and all of the cannabis being researched in the country has to come from this facility. That might have just changed in the last 6 months, but for years and years and years, it was one really low par facility in the U.S. South somewhere like Louisiana or Mississippi, where all that stuff had to come from. And that really held the states back quite a bit in terms of innovation in this field. So, there is some stuff around patents that is, for many of us Americans, worth thinking about. Like, do we really want to be losing this innovation war, I guess, for lack of a better word, due to prohibition? I would say no. And we should really consider, like, how do we compete? And this whole drug war thing, locking people up, is just one part of that. We also have to worry about the business aspects and the medical implications of having to import everything from Israel as opposed to manufacturing it domestically. So things to consider there. I think we talked about some other interesting organizations too. Do you recall anything?
There was we talked about the German patent we talked about was one for synthetic ayahuasca. It is just an application. It hasn't been granted. It's German patent number DE 2016100146003. it basically was containing, it was called synthetic ayahuasca, but it was, pretty much at least 2 representatives from the group of Banisteropsis caapi, and then you've got the DMT containing chemicals as well. So, I'm not, I'm wondering what exactly, how they're saying this is new from the traditional cultures, but it might be just the way that they're mixing them together or characterizing them, but it appears to be some of the same chemicals that have been used for thousands of years.
Right. I think it's relevant insofar as it would be easier to do medical research if you had isolated the two, I hate to call it this, most significant compounds in the substance, in the brew. So the MAOIs and the DMT, so that you could have, a 2-molecule reaction, which is an interesting thing because most medical research right now is only happening with single compounds. We don't know too much about drug interactions overall, but I think we should. So the synthetic stuff is interesting. It's interesting to me that he went ahead with the patent because there's a lot of people who have been writing about this for a long time. So would it hold up internationally? Hard saying. But who knows? That's one of the reasons why we're interested in this DMTX project, because it's a single molecule that could simulate the ayahuasca trajectory for research purposes, in terms of like blood concentration over time. That was a pretty fascinating one as well. Did you find anything with 5-MeO DMT at all in your research?
No, I didn't. And that's the one that one of the natural sources of that is the toad, right?
Right. Exactly.
No, I didn't. But I'm sure that what you said, the research on extended state DMT would be an example of where patents make a great deal of sense, because you've got something that's been used for a long time and you're tweaking the application of it. That's your invention. Do you know if they've applied for patent protection on that?
To the best of my knowledge, no. But I've talked to them about that. I think they're going to try to use the open source model to protect their innovation there.
Well, one thing they have to worry about is that the way the United States system is set up now, it changed, the laws changed in 2013 so that it's the first to file basically gets the invention. So in order to determine which invention has priority or which invention came first, the important consideration now is who filed the patent first. So that's why you've got to be careful, and in terms of if you're out there thinking you're sitting on an invention and you're going to publish something about it or sell it, all that could backfire. For one thing, if you get it out and make it public, somebody can just swoop in and file a patent before you, and pretty much you would have a difficult time proving that you came up with it if they filed the patent first. So that's why it's really important to get patent protection early on in the process. And we talked a little bit before about that, there are different types of patents. One is a provisional patent, and then there's the non-provisional patent. And the provisional patent does not have to have all the details that the non-provisional patent does, and it gives you like a year grace period before you can file the non-provisional patent, and it still preserves sort of your patent protection.
Right.
So you want to make sure if you do file the provisional patent that you fully disclose your invention, but you don't have to worry about having the full application. But still, that then you would have priority. If somebody else comes along later, and takes your research away from you, you can still rely on the provisional patent to show that it was your invention.
Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. I have some friends that graduated from Berkeley School of Music, and part of the curriculum is music law around like, I suppose you would call it copyrights. So not necessarily
Yes.
a patent, right? So it's more,
Right.
They would always say it's like the first use on the web of a name. So say you called yourself like DJ I Love Cigars, and you had like a DJ career for 5 years, and then somebody tried to use that, you would have some sort of like legal protection, I guess,
Right.
just by first use. But that would be different from patents, you're saying.
Right. What you're talking about is called common law copyright and trademark protection, and that is just what I said. That normally whoever has first use has priority, but in the patent system, it was just changed in 2013. That basically the courts didn't want to screw around with figuring out who came up with the invention, so they just made it easy. If you file it first, it's going to be. I mean, there's exceptions to everything in the law, but I mean that's going to be the first to file is generally going to have priority for the invention. So that's why it's important if you're sitting on an invention not to publicize it and thinking somebody's going to swoop in and file it ahead of you.
Yeah, that's interesting. What is most interesting to me about it is in this particular case where it's just a machine, like a pretty cheap machine in the medical world, infusion pump, and then you just put the drug through it, and it keeps the drug at a certain constant of precision concentration in your blood. That is very fine tunable and programmable. So, right. I think maybe the invention is all of that paired together with a pharmacokinetic model of what does the onset look like and feel like, and is there a tolerance built up over time, stuff like that. So, I think you're probably right. And I'll make sure to get those guys this interview before we launch it publicly so they can dig in a little bit.
Yeah, well, this is you were talking again about the extended state DMT.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know what they're doing. Is it the method of delivery that's new, or is it just the process itself that the timing of it or something?
So it's the method of delivery using this infusion pump technology. So it could be drawn out for hours or weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
But there's not necessarily a therapeutic goal in sight. It's kind of like for psychonauts by psychonauts in a lot of ways. But I did pitch the idea to Ben Sessa, who's a pretty big deal therapist, psychedelic therapist in the UK. He said, "Oh, that's a great idea. That could be used really well for, single molecule ayahuasca analog research. So like we're just using DMT and we're putting somebody through the ayahuasca session in a nice, safe environment in a hospital bed or wherever." There are applications that could be medical.
Yeah.
But the purpose of the project is more exploratory, I think, than medical, since we have so much medical research happening already.
And eventually they're going to come up with, like the biosensors will be so accurate that they'll be able to, monitor your blood flows. They're doing that now with insulin pumps. That's
great. Are they attaching them kind of permanently and they monitor and deliver?
Yeah, and then they can sense the glucose levels in the blood and modify. Yeah, and I don't know how perfect that technology is, but it's certainly, you can see the application there. That it sounds like in some ways that sort of monitoring technology could have applications in all kinds of fields, including the one we're talking about now, basically.
Absolutely. So here's a thing my brother made recently was using these Raspberry Pi devices. So you can effectively buy a computer for a handful of dollars, not very much money, and program it to do whatever you want. And people check this out. It's Raspberry Pi. It's really small devices, and you can do almost anything. So he developed an automated brewing system that had built-in temperature controls and timer controls with like real-time monitoring. To an external monitor that he could watch to make sure everything was going well. So he was controlling the temperature of the brew to like 1/4 degree for a substantial amount of time, which is something you can't really do using old methods like a thermometer. I'm sure big breweries are doing stuff like this, but I think that's a fascinating concept, and you make it to a micro scale, like a small device that you could probably put onto a IV port that a nurse puts on your chest or something. Then why not? The DMTX thing now becomes a little box that slaps onto your chest, which is kind of a horrifying prospect, but something.
Yeah, I don't know if I wanted. I think you'd have to have fun with that. I think that particular device I'll pass.
Right. Maybe that's what prison looks like. I don't know. Like I'm hoping not. Even though I'm involved in the project, I'm not actually all that interested in doing the DMTX thing. In the next couple of years, like I'm probably going to let a bunch of people do it first before I even try to get involved. It seems like such an intense situation.
Yeah. Wait till the settlement comes up on Mars before you visit.
That's one thing I was thinking about is like time will get a little funny with space travel, obviously. And people always talk about virtual reality being helpful there, but I think there's a lot of applications for psychedelics and space travel just to keep people assuming they have control enough not to sabotage the spaceship, but something to help them pass the time and develop individually.
But doesn't it work the other way around? Because this is like the DMT experience. You think you're there for 1,000 years, but it's only been 10 minutes, as opposed to you're been on a spaceship for 1,000 years. You want it to seem like 10 minutes. It's like you need the reverse of it.
Right. Maybe you have to come out and exercise your DMT muscle in your brain once every year or something. Who knows? We'll find out, though. Brighter minds, smarter than I, are working on that. And some really fascinating news in this psychedelic-ish space travel space is that Joe Rogan is having Elon Musk on tonight on his show at pretty late, like 9:30, I think, Pacific. So that's going to be a really fascinating thing because Rogan's super into psychedelics and Musk is really into space travel. So I think that's going to be a really interesting show. And I'm really excited about that. Yeah.
I'm surprised Mr. Musk has the time to do that. He's been, he's been under fire lately, so maybe it's therapeutic for him to blow off some steam.
I think it's a great place to get good PR and tell his side of the story. I read his biography recently, and this is one of his habits, is like telling the truth publicly because he feels like he has to, as opposed to going through his publicist or something. So he was regularly doing that. Go ahead.
Who is we talked about the Elon. I think we mentioned before, the Elon Musk of the world, they're the visionary people. Do you know what Peter Thiel's reputation is in terms of visionary and what they're doing and trying to help out humanity and humanitarian causes and things like that?
So
you don't have to answer that. I'm just wondering if he's of the similar.
Well, so he's probably the richest gay Republican in the U.S. Maybe there's others elsewhere. I don't know, but he's super rich. And being a gay Republican is a weird paradox, right? Because you're kind of voting against your own rights in a lot of ways.
Like Cheney's daughter.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So there's some inherent contradiction there. He's also like a hyper capitalist and a Stanford lawyer, I think we talked about.
Yeah.
So super smart, like smartest guy in the room. He made a killing off of investing with Musk, or in the early days, investing in PayPal and Uber, I think too, or Facebook and Uber. So his book is really fascinating. It goes into like the nature of monopoly and like what his book's called 0 to 1. I loved it. And saying like, you don't have to like monopolize the market, but you do have to make a product that's 10 to 100 times better than the competition. And then you have a sort of like soft monopoly. Like, why would anybody buy something different when it's that much better than the competing product?
I think from the sound of it is what he's trying to achieve in the psilocybin market.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, yeah, because Prozac kind of sucks. Like it's okay for some indications. SSRIs generally.
Do you know if has he been public about participating in himself with psychedelics like some of the other people, or
nothing I've caught has indicated that. No,
because that's one thing I think that I don't know. Maybe I'm optimistic, but maybe that tends to be what you hear when people do this. The plants tell them that they need to share this with the world type thing, And
so my sense is that, he saw that this was substantially better than other therapies and decided to invest. So Tim Ferriss, who's like a business blogger, writer, podcaster, got access to a lot of billionaires through his work. And most of the billionaires he interviewed said they had substantial psychedelic experiences and they were very meaningful to them.
Right.
So it's worth considering. Like, there is a good chance that Musk is psychedelically informed. Or sorry, not Musk. Well, also Musk probably, but maybe he just came out that way. But Thiel in particular, like, had those opportunities and experiences. So we never know unless he comes out and says it and we believe him. We don't know what he's thinking or trying to do. Perhaps he saw that MAPS was progressing, but progressing very slowly. And what would be better is probably having a competing organization doing it quicker with a different drug. Maybe. more difficult drug.
Maybe the plants told him to do that.
That would be great. Yeah, the stupid monkeys are wrecking the place. What are we doing?
That's right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love, like, I actually kind of appreciate him. Like, there was some interviews with Peter Thiel on the Tim Ferriss show where he kind of just got into some of his ideology and stuff like that. And one really fascinating idea was, how could we make, or what is technology doing? Like, what has technology done and what is it doing? And typically it's dematerializing, so everything gets smaller. We need to own less. Like, our cell phone contains $18,000 worth of stuff that we would usually need to buy separately, and we can get it for less than $200 most of the time now. And with artificial intelligence coming on board, we have the opportunity, not necessarily going to happen, but we have the opportunity to make artificial intelligences that are similar to the world's best ever tutors and educators, that learn how the student learns best over time. And they're with the student for their life, or at least through their learning life. So we have like a Harvard, Stanford, Yale grade teacher from the time we're 4 till we're ready to go out and conquer the world, And maybe that cuts down the amount of time we need in school by half. Who knows? I think there's, once everybody in the world has that kind of education, that's huge. We have 7 billion people with an incredible education, or probably by that point, 14 billion.
Yeah.
And that's at the point when the world really needs it the most. Like, we need it now, but we're going to really, really need it then. Just because human creativity meeting mind to create artificial minds is going to be hopefully the thing that pulls us out of this scary spiral that we're in. Yeah. Hopefully that wasn't too crazy of a rant, but I actually kind of appreciate the guy, and everybody that I talk to in the psychedelic world does not like him at all. For various reasons. I'm sure some of them have great reasons. I'm sure some people are just following the pack.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, but hopefully, it will allow people an alternative to traditional antidepressant medication, and that if that's the end goal, then
Absolutely. Anxiety, depression, and PTSD, if we can eliminate that, even if people are making a killing on it, I think the world would be a better place. And there's always LSD, people. There's always LSD, and that's a really cheap thing per dose to make. It will be available on the black market forever, and hopefully on the legal market within 10 years. So we'll see. It's it's a similar class of drug. It's a tryptamine, I think. So, why it shouldn't be much more difficult to get it through. And we have a long history of clinical use with LSD as well. So hopefully we can get it through. And it's a Western invention without much baggage from third part indigenous groups. Came out of Switzerland, so we don't have to worry about hurting their feelings in a lot of ways. So cool. We're coming up on an hour. Anything else we want to get into?
No, I think we're good. You know, I noticed that there's I think the next wave of patents, I think, is going to be adding a bunch of things to, you know, adding cannabis and cannabinoid extracts to a variety of things like beer and all kinds of things. I mean, I think that's probably, you know, the next on the, in terms of the marketplace where you're going to see a lot of patents. I mean, that, I think that numerically is going to be seen where you're going to find most of the patent activity, just because of the fact that that's legal in so many states. And
Canada,
you know, still, yeah.
They are beer drinkers. And I think the distributor who owns Corona, I don't know their name, dumped more than $1 billion in investments into Canada, into the cannabis market to make cannabis-infused beverages. So I think that's coming quickly.
Cannabis beer, Blue Moon's inventor doing that. Hi-Fi hops by Lagunas and Heineken.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I prefer gummies. I don't know that I need to eat drink a beer with cannabis in it. It's a funny thing. Like the scariest drug I've probably eaten, and a lot of folks I know have ever eaten, is cannabis. So it can create some extreme states. So it's funny. There is a huge market opportunity there. Even here, people are buying sodas because of the laws. Alcohol and cannabis can't really mix, but there are underground people brewing with cannabis for sure. So it'll be interesting to see what the big companies put together and the small timers when they're, you know, tinkering away with different formulas. I think it's going to be great. I'll try some small ones. If you have a 2 milligram beer, I'll drink that. 5 milligrams is my standard dose. But some lunatics go for hundreds. I have no idea why or how. All right, so I guess we can wrap. And what's the name of your podcast?
End of the Road.
End of the Road. You've got a lot of great guests on there. You're covering psychedelics from a really cool perspective, and I suggest people go check it out. You even were gracious enough to let Kyle and I go on there. I was really happy that you did that. So thanks a lot for joining us, Mike. And anything else?
No, have a great evening.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care. And there you have it. Hope you learned some things about patents and psychedelics. There's plenty of room left for new patents in the psychedelic space. I know it doesn't feel psychedelic to create those, but perhaps a way to think about it is by pushing patents through and allowing everybody free license to those patents. You are protecting people's freedom in the legal system that we're currently dealing with. So, you know, perhaps consider it. And, you know, if you wanted to make a career of patents in the psychedelic space, I'm sure there's opportunity there too. So check that out. So thank you all for listening. If you want to support the show, give us a review on iTunes, maybe mention us on one of your socials, join our group, Psychedelics Today Facebook group, and yeah, maybe just scoop up a book or a shirt or a mug or something on our shop. The website there is psychedelicstodayshop.com. So hope you all have a great rest of your day and see you on the next episode. Bye.